Well, I am getting quite the reputation at Cornerstone for forgetting people's names, sorry Phil, and also for having a real big liking for fried chicken. And I genuinely can't understand why. I don't know why I'm getting that reputation. Back in Manchester, all three of the pastors did their pastoral meetings in the local chicken shop. It was called Yard and Coop. Now, before you think, that feels a little bit like a stitch-up, the reason was because we shared one big office, and it was hard to do pastoral meetings in there. It was a bit stinky. It had some furry friends crawling along the floor with some tails on them, and it was hard to have conversations that were there one-to-one. So we would pop down to the fried chicken shop called Yard and Coop, sit on that giant chicken there behind me, eat the giant meals that were there, and have just enough space between each of us that we could chat to the people that we were doing pastoral conversations with and members' meetings without hearing each other. To be honest with you, it worked. It was pastoral care with seasoning. It was wonderful. Then one time, a guy from church said, "Hey, Eric, can I take you somewhere new for our member interview? It's called Virga. It's my treat. I think you'll love it." So I met him there. Virga was different. Virga was clean and bougie. There was no giant chicken to sit on in Virga. I filed that away. Screens inside said, "Healthy fast food, just like the real thing." Bit weird, but Manchester loves its branding, even if it contradicts, so whatever, that's fine. We'll sit down and we'll eat. We sat down, we started chatting, the food arrives, it looks right, it smells right. I take a bite, and then something is wrong. Deeply wrong. The texture's off. It's chewy and crumbly at the same time. There's a fungal flavor to it, and I am desperately trying to be polite as Aaron is telling me about his passion to make Jesus known in Malaysia, and I'm going, Have I just eaten gone-off chicken? I really hope I haven't. And I'm trying not to spit out my food when I suddenly look up to the counter, and there's a screen behind the counter that says, "Virga, vegan burger. 100% vegan food." I've not eaten gone-off chicken. This is deep-fried tofu. To be fair, once I realized that, I could finish it, and it was decent food. Not what I wanted, but that shouldn't matter. It was nice, it was tasty, it was good, and it's much more importantly was Aaron's heart for Jesus. Infinitely more important than my lunch, really warming to the heart. But can I be honest with you? Can I just be honest with you for a little bit? There was a wee bit of me that was a bit miffed at the situation. A little bit of me that was a bit disappointed. A little bit of me that went home a bit flat as the other two pastors told me about the great lunches and the chicken that they had and the different things that I would have ordered from there. And I went home a bit flat until I thought, Eric, what are you doing? You know, sometimes it takes a little while for the Holy Spirit to really kick in and remind you of what really matters. And I thought, you had a warm meal with a great guy who was telling you about Jesus and about the wonderful things that he wants to do in the future. And all you can really be honestly thinking about is just, but it really would have been nice to have some fried chicken. Here's what that moment reminded me of and showed me. Grumbling doesn't come from having nothing. It comes from believing you deserve something different to what you've been given. I had everything that I could possibly need and nothing that I wanted. And in that gap in between, it revealed something ugly in my heart, something entitled, something a bit selfish. And that's exactly where we find Israel in Exodus 16. Last week, Rupert showed us Moses meeting God in the wilderness. If we take things forward a little bit, well, the burning bush worked. Moses went. He confronted Pharaoh. The plagues came. Israel was freed, and Pharaoh's army drowned. And after 400 years of slavery, God's people are free. You'd think they'd be more excited than I would be at getting fried chicken. You'd expect them to be euphoric, songs, dancing, relief so deep it fills your lungs. But what you get instead is in Exodus 16, complaint. 6 weeks after seeing some of the greatest miracles recorded in the Bible. 6 weeks since the Red Sea is split, and already they're nostalgic for slavery. Already they would rather have pots of meat than the promise of God. Now, before we roll our eyes, we all are the same, aren't we? We all have this Virga moment or let's call it the manna in the wilderness moment, where we've wanted something and God gives us something else, and we think that is wrong, that is not good, that is not helpful to me. God, do you really care about what's going on in my lives? You see, the wilderness doesn't just mean that you are in a testing situation. The wilderness also is revealing what you are trusting. So come with me to our first point in Exodus chapter 16. We grumble when we trust the wrong things. We grumble when we trust the wrong things. Let me read to you the first 3 verses. It says, the whole Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of Sin. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted, but you have brought us out to this desert to starve this entire assembly to death. Now, before we get into the complaint, look with me at verse 1 before you look at verse 3. We need to see the context. They have just come from Elim. Chapter 15 tells us that Elim had 12 springs and 70 palm trees, abundance in the desert. God had led them out of the wilderness. He had led them towards safety. He had led them to a place of abundance. And as he draws them to the promised land, they make their way through the desert, and that's when they start complaining. God has been with them the entire time, but in a short period of struggle, they're rewriting it as though Egypt, their slavery, was paradise. And if you can, would you look at me at verse 7? Because it's one of the most revealing moments in this passage. When Moses says, what are we? When he says, what are we? He's doing something deliberate and important. He's redirecting the question entirely to show them that it's a question about them thinking that God himself, God cannot be trusted. The main point is right there in verse 8. You are not grumbling against us, but against the Lord. Here's the thing. They're hungry, genuinely, but they're doing something with their hunger. They're not just hungry, they're not just struggling, they're interpreting their hunger as a verdict. God has failed us. The Hebrew word for grumbling appears 6 times in this passage. And it's not just a little bit of a whinge, a little bit of sadness, a bit of struggle. I mean, if you look in your Bibles and you look in the book of Psalms, there are many times that people struggle. Many times that people cry out to God. They are not in sin as they do that. It's a good thing to talk to God and be honest about your struggles. But grumbling is different. Grumbling, the Hebrew word for that is growling. Growling against God. This is not just saying that something is difficult. This is persistent, direct complaint. God doesn't tell them off. God doesn't condemn them for being hungry. He makes it serious that they're in a difficult situation. The difference is they're not talking just about their situation. They're talking about their theology. They're not just saying the situation is hard. They're saying, God, you are not good. I don't know if I can trust you. They're not just questioning what their circumstances are. They're questioning their theology of who God is. We are in this position. It is bad. You probably can't be trusted, God. I don't know if I want to follow you anymore. That is the problem that we see here with grumbling. It is not coming to God with your struggles. It is growling against God. And if we're honest, don't we sometimes do the same thing? The student who says uni isn't as fun as they expected. They feel lonely. Has God forgotten me? The young professional finding life isn't as fulfilling as they hoped 6 weeks into their new graduate job. Is God really there with them, helping them? The empty nesters who've always dreamed of quiet and been able to enjoy their home to themselves, going, it just feels a bit lonely now. It feels a bit empty. Has God forgotten us? Have we got any purpose going forward? Different lives, different seasons, same verdict being reached about God. If the question underneath the question is, God, you can't be trusted, should I really follow you? Hear me again. It is fine to find those situations difficult in different ways. But the difference between finding it hard and grumbling is when we turn to God and go, you can't be trusted anymore. See, wilderness doesn't create our idols. It just exposes the ones we've been carrying all along. Grumbling is real. Hunger is real. God sees all of that. He knows our lives are difficult. But watch what he does in response to this. Come with me to our second point. God provides what we need, not what we demand. Let me read to you verse 4 and 5. It says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions. On the sixth day, they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other days." God responds, not with punishment, but with grace. But notice how he responds. Notice how he provides. He doesn't provide a feast. He doesn't provide a stockpile. He doesn't provide a 5-year guarantee. He provides manna each morning, just enough for the day. Do you see that here? God doesn't, they want security, and God doesn't give them a pantry. He gives them a pattern. Can you see the pattern? Can you see the test there in verse 4? There's a pattern and a test that follows the Sabbath built into the design. God explicitly frames this as he says, "In this way I will test them to see whether they will follow my instructions." The test is not, can you gather enough food? The test is, can you trust that tomorrow's manna will come, even if you can't see it? And notice that that Sabbath principle of resting, of trusting is God, is right there before a single flake of manna falls down. It's right there before they start gathering up their provisions. What that means, and it's really important because we struggle with this really in a big way, is the rhythm of working 6 days, taking time to be with God, resting, engaging with, and enjoying him. It's not a tack on. It is there right baked in before it even begins with the manna coming down. As if God is saying to you, there is a rhythm of the way things are meant to be. You need to take rest seriously because I am creating a world for you to flourish in. If you follow me, you will see that that is a good thing. We'll unpack that further in a few weeks' time when Rupert will open for us Hebrews 4, and it says make every effort to enter rest. But that's a sermon for another time. Let's carry on with this one over here. The point here we can see is you can gather it. You can gather the manna, but you cannot control it. That's God's role, not yours. And if you look a bit further forward, just past the principle of resting, collecting a double portion, do you see in verse 18, there's also a way in which they are to collect as well. God gives them a pattern, and then he says, collect an omer of this wonderful bread that is there. Now, I don't imagine that you know what an omer is. You don't go around going, can I get 2 omers of milk, please, today? It's not a measurement we really talk about. But if you imagine, the medium-sized 2-liter bottles of milk that you carry, that roughly that size, that's about an omer. So what happens here, if we read this verse in verse 18, is it says, and when they measured it out by the omer, the one who gathered much did not have too much, and the one who gathered little did not have too little. Everyone had gathered just as much as they needed. Do you see the miracle there? How amazing that is? Let that land. The industrious person who gets up early and works really hard and fills their jar to a brim gets an omer. The elderly widow who could only move slowly and gather a little gets an omer. The man with 6 children and the man with none, each of them gets an omer. God is not just providing bread. He's demonstrating that the quantity of his provision is not done by the effort of the receiver, but by God's provision and his kindness towards us in the first place. He provides for us all, and he provides what we need. This is bread that's given to us, not based on our performance, but based on our need and our trust in him. This is sovereign grace made edible. The omer is a miracle that is making a specific theological claim. God is not interested in your performance. He's interested in your heart. And that is something that is really, really important for us to see, because everywhere else in the world, we are told it is all about your performance. I mean, when you get a little kid, you can't wait until they grow to become independent. You want them to be able to stand on their own 2 feet and to grow and to perform, to do things that they can do in the future. When you go into the workplace, you are judged based on your performance. And if you don't perform appropriately, you get a performance review. But don't you notice that with God, something is completely different? He doesn't call us to be independent. He calls us to grow in childlike dependence on him. Even here in the Old Testament, we see that principle, the test of relying on God every single day. Not because we are great, not because we are impressive. You see over here, they're complaining every single day, yet God is providing for them again and again and again, not based on their performance, but based on his committed faithfulness. That's what the miracle of the Omer shows us there. So we've got to ask one more question. What happens when that provision comes? Because we get to verse 20 and it finishes on a bit of an awkward climax, doesn't it? Some people, even though God is doing this wonderful miracle, even though he's raining down bread from heaven, even though he is in a cloud of a pillar being with them, even though he split the sea and he is with them now, some of them hoard anyway. And verse 20 tells us it turns into maggots by the morning. Before we get to what happens when they hoard, let's just quickly talk about why they hoard. Hoarding is the practical expression of distrust, isn't it? When you can't believe tomorrow will be okay, you start stockpiling. You start getting worried for how things will go wrong. Can you remember that when COVID happened? We started stockpiling the most weirdest things, didn't we? There were some people who bought like reams and reams and reams of toilet paper, and some people were probably still getting through it today. They bought that many. But here's the thing. You can buy loads of toilet paper at Costco. You can stockpile toilet paper at Costco. You cannot stockpile grace. They don't sell it at Costco. That is not what you can get there. Hoarded manna rots. Whether it's in food, in a jar, or your identity in a CV, hoarded manna will always rot. Let me ask you, what are you hoarding? Is it the idea that your career can become your hope, the approval of others, your track record, your reputation, the grades that prove you're enough, a job that will allow you to feel fulfilled, maybe even the hope and the dream that the children that you love or your grandchildren, all of them will come to know and love Jesus. All of those are really good things. None of them are bad things. But if you hoard them, if you grasp at them, if you make them something ultimate, and if it doesn't go your way that you want, and you say, no, God, you cannot be trusted. You must be bad because this is not going the way that I wanted. I know better. Then we're finding ourselves in this same problem that's right here. Can you see how easy it is to slot into that? Because it is so easy to think we know better than God, and yet he shows us in his character he loves us, he's got his best plans for us, and he would give us better gifts than we would give ourselves. See, there's the failure that tracks all the way across in those 20 verses. There's also the faithfulness of God that you can see through those 20 verses as well. Come back with me to verse 10, and let's see this. Exodus 16, verse 10. While Aaron was speaking to the whole Israelite community, they looked towards the desert, and there was the glory of the Lord appearing in the cloud. God, even though everything feels difficult, even though the Israelites are saying, we have been abandoned, we have been left on our own, God is there in his glory, right there with them. Do you see that? Every other God talks about performing, doing more, being impressive, but our God is right in the middle of our mess with us in a pillar of a cloud, caring for us, providing, showing us that he is not distant, but that he is there among a people who have accused him of bringing them out there to die. And from that cloud, God speaks. He says, I've heard their grumbling. And then he gives them meat and bread. He gives them life to the fullest. And this bread for the day, I mean, it mustn't it? It must draw our minds immediately forward to Jesus. It must draw our minds forward to thinking about John chapter 6, verse 35, when Jesus says, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. Jesus is saying, the man appointed to me, that daily, unglamorous, you cannot hoard it bread from heaven, it's a signpost, it's a preview, and it points to Jesus who serves God faithfully for 40 days in the desert. The Israelites fail after 40 years in the desert. grumbling and complaining. Jesus, in his faithfulness over 40 days, shows what it is like to trust God, and he's sent as the bread himself. God doesn't give you what you demand. He gives you what you need, and then he asks you to come back tomorrow for more. So let's come to our final point. Our faithlessness does not stop God's faithfulness, but it does cost us. Let me say that again. Our faithlessness does not stop God's faithfulness, but it does cost us. Time and time again, as you look through this first 20 verses, Israel is failing. They're failing, and they're failing. But God is still faithful to Israel. So I want to point out two things as we wrap up. Number one, God is gracious. Do you see that? This thing goes on for 40 years where he provides. He is kind. He is gracious to them. They continue to complain. They continue to grumble. If you look down to verse 35, it tells you the Israelites ate manna 40 years until they came to the land that was settled. 40 years of daily provision. God is kind. God is gracious in the Old Testament. He provides. Their failure did not stop the manna. That's grace. But there's a second thing that's also true here. Something that you cannot avoid if you look at the passage carefully. And it's that disobedience is not without consequence. Disobedience is not without consequence. The passage doesn't say you must get everything right, you must be successful, you must obey perfectly, and that's the only way God will bless you. We've just talked about the grace of God, but you can see two failures that happen here, and they're not abstract. They show you that there are consequences to those two failures. Come with me to see failure number one in verses 19 to 20, as they cling too tightly and grasp. Moses tells those who are hoarding explicitly, leave nothing till the morning, and some do it anyway. And verse 20 is deliberately visceral. It's deliberately graphic in its description. It says they paid no attention to Moses. Some of them left part of it until the morning, and it bred worms, and it became foul, and Moses was angry with them. Those Hebrew words for it bred worms and it became foul, they're not a gentle rebuke. They're meant to be language that makes you feel disgusted, to recoil, to feel like maybe I've eaten some gone-off chicken and I need to spit it out in that sense. It's meant to make you want to respond with some sort of disgust that is there. It's making it very clear, isn't it? The consequence is built into the act. In the manna, there's grace, abundance, daily miracle, and it becomes repulsive in our hands the moment that we grip it too tightly, the moment we put our hope in that instead of God. Hoarding is not neutral. It's a practical expression of theological distrust. It's to say, God, you cannot be trusted. Let me get things myself. And when we do that, everything breaks down. What was grace becomes rot the moment we try to hold it beyond what God intended. But there's a second failure if you look a bit further on in the text. It's slightly outside of the passage that we've read today, but you can read it later on in your own time. If you look at verses 27 to 30, you'll see that there are Sabbath breakers as well. And the second failure is a little bit different. In some ways, it's more revealing. God has told them from the beginning, didn't he, in verse 4, keep the Sabbath. Gather for 6 days. On the seventh day, rest. Trust the double portion on the sixth day is a guarantee. God has planned for this. God has baked this into the system. You're to trust God. He is good. He'll provide for you. Verse 27. Nevertheless, some of the people went out on the seventh day to gather it, but they found none. God's response to Moses is sharp. How long will you refuse to keep my commands? The Sabbath in this passage isn't just a recommendation. It isn't just a guide. It's a covenantal question, a relationship question. Do you trust that I love you, that I'll provide for you? Do you trust that I will continue to do that, and will you obey me in those situations? And this is perhaps the most pastorally distinct and direct moment that we need to see today, because we live in a city, in a culture, in a place that is structurally suspicious of people who rest. There's a pressure to perform. There's a pressure to do more. There's a pressure to always make sure you're hacking things and making them more, I don't know, what's the word? Efficient, and doing more and more and more and more. And yet God is telling us we must trust him. We must rest. We must move away from the anxiety of trying to produce more and more and more. You're not a machine. When you fill the seventh day with work because you cannot trust the provision of the sixth, you're not being prudent. You're not getting ahead of others. You are distrusting a God who has given you a pattern of rest and of enjoying him. And the result is the same as it always was. You go out and you find nothing. I don't think it's any coincidence that we are talking more and more about burnout, both in the world out there and among pastors and people in the church congregations across the world, because we are ignoring this principle of following the Lord and of making every effort to rest well. But hear me, even when we are faithless, remember, there's still manna for tomorrow. You might be looking at it going, oh my goodness, I fail in a million ways. I distrust God, I look at everything else. But for 40 years, God continues to provide. As we look back into the Bible, we see that Jesus gave his body for us and he feeds us. If you're looking at yourself going, oh, I wish I would do better, see that. Feel the weight of that. See the ways in which you distrust God, but don't just stay there. Then move towards trusting him, loving him, and engaging him. God's faithfulness is steady, even though our distrust can shape our experiences. See, Israel will keep failing this test, not just here, across 40 years of wilderness, wandering as they fail repeatedly. They'll fail for the rest of this book as we read the Old Testament. They grumble, they hoard, they chase other gods, they build a golden calf. They are, in Paul's words in 1 Corinthians 10, examples written for our instruction. Paul picks up this exact passage in 1 Corinthians 10, and it's worth pausing on that to see what he does with it. He's writing to the church in Corinth, and what he says to the church in Corinth is, this is an example to us, he says. Nevertheless, God was not pleased with most of them. Their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. And as he describes all the different ways in which they were unfaithful, he then finishes with, these things happened to them as examples and were written down as warnings for us, on whom the culmination of the ages has come. Paul writes this to a church that is all about performance, to a church that is convinced that they are sorted because they're really productive, to a church that treats its members terribly because it moves on from the gospel and pulls forward. Are we hearing the same warning? Are we seeing the same mirror? Are we trying to lean on something that we think is more reliable, come back to God and see his goodness and his kindness towards us? Let's not just go to the New Testament to see the warning. Let's go to the New Testament to see the provision and the kindness of God as well. Yes, there is a significant warning that's there. There's also Jesus in Matthew 4:4 saying, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. Jesus, as he talks about this same passage that Paul's talking about, the same passage that we've read in Exodus 16, he's talking about it and its fulfillment. And he's trying to show us that the provision is through him. Because he was faithful when we're faithless, his faithfulness is credited to all who trust him. You do not have to pass the wilderness test. Someone's passed it for you already. You do not have to earn the manna. It has been rained down. You do not have to hold it all together. Someone is holding it, and his faithfulness does not depend on you. So look towards Jesus. Look towards his provision for you. And to the extent that you trust him, you'll be able to continue to push forward as well. Grace has a shape. And when we live against that shape, we don't lose God's love, but we do miss out on what is designed to be given to us. And that is a problem. We do need to see that consequence. So as I wrap up, let's remember those 3 points that we've talked about. We grumble when we trust the wrong things. God gives us what we need, not what we demand. And his faithfulness holds, even when ours doesn't. Some of us are sitting with provision that looks nothing like we expected today. A season of disappointment, a season of grief, a season of sorrow, a season of difficulty, a situation that feels like it is not what you wanted and you would want to spit it out of your mouth. A life that would not have been the one that you've chosen. And the temptation that the Israelites felt is very close to you right now. Maybe, just maybe God has got this wrong. Maybe his promise was better back there. Maybe God is really kind to those out there, but not to me. But the Bible would look at that and say back to you with a resounding no. Look to the cross. What if it isn't that God is getting it wrong? What if it is that this is your daily bread? The real issue isn't what God has given you, but what you expected it to be. This is the final passage that I want us to look at as we wrap up. In Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 2-3, it says, "Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the wilderness these 40 years, to humble and test you, in order to know what was in your heart. He humbled you, causing you to hunger, and then feeding you with manna to teach you that man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord." The wilderness is not where God abandons you. It is where he teaches you to depend on him. Friends, don't miss the manna because you're expecting fried chicken. Come hungry. Come delighting in Jesus. Christ is enough. Let me pray. We'll respond. Father, we thank you that the wilderness has a purpose. Thank you that hunger is not the end of the story. We know that we can all struggle, that we can all feel pain. But would you remind us that manna is coming? Would you remind us that ultimately Christ has already come? And would you help us to continue to look forward again and again to the day when Christ will come and wipe away every one of our tears? Lord, we want to take seriously our faithlessness, the ways that we continue to distrust you, the ways we continue to say that you are not good, the ways we continue to reach back to slavery and hope that life would give us something better than what we've been given. But we want to look forward to trusting you, to remind ourselves of your character, of how you were faithful for 40 years of the Israelites, and how ultimately you proved your character at the cross. You have always been a good father. And so we pray, in the middle of all of our wildernesses and all of our struggles, help us to trust you, help us in our weaknesses, help us to see that Christ is enough. Amen.